I'm Shahar Azani, sitting in for Mark Golub. And in the news, the start of the Democratic National Convention this week to formally nominate former Vice President Joe Biden for president and California Senator Kamala Harris for vice president. Joining us to discuss some of the issues relating to the Democratic Party and its relationship to the American Jewish community and to the State of Israel is a frequent JBS commentator, regular opinion columnist for the Israeli daily Haaretz, and the president emeritus of the Reform Movement Union for Reform Judaism, Rabbi Eric Yoffie. Rabbi Eric, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Good to be with you, Shahar.
And good to see you. How are you doing in these times?
I'm holding up as best I can, day by day.
So let us jump right into the topic. I'd like to ask you first, both Democrats and Republicans, they had to forego the typical nomination, the nominating conventions with thousands of people, with all of that noise and excitement generated. When you have a live convention, what do you expect the response will be to a virtual nominating convention like we're having this week with 2 hours every night of basically video airings?
I admit that I was skeptical about the whole enterprise here. What we miss in a virtual convention is the pageantry and the drama and the excitement of a large in-person event. You worry about technological difficulties and so on. I mean, the purpose of a convention is to rally behind your candidate, engage the American people. Can you really do that virtually? But I must say, last night was the first night, and I watched it, and I thought the Democrats really did a good job of combining inspiration and a political message. I was quite impressed.
And may I ask you, Eric, in your opinion, watching last night's beginning of the conference, what was your highlight? What did you feel was the highlight of last night?
I would point out two things. First of all, they made use of regular people, working Americans, more so than I would have anticipated. And they were effective. They were powerful. The woman who spoke about her father's death from COVID, in particular, I thought that was one dimension that merits, our appreciation and admiration. And then second of all, like virtually everyone else, Michelle Obama was the star in my view. She was quite extraordinary. I thought Bernie Sanders did a good job, and he had a task that he had to accomplish, and I thought he was successful in that. But in terms of overall impact, it was really Michelle Obama who stood out and finished it up the evening in a truly dramatic and effective way.
It was interesting for me to see, you're mentioning the ordinary people, which is quite important to see. But one of them, I think it was the farmer who started his, short address by wishing, giving condolences to President Trump with the passing of his brother. I thought that was interesting.
Right. Yes. I noted that as well. And I wondered, was that going to lead to some comments that would be supportive of Trump? But no, it was a human gesture, and it was appropriate in every way.
And so heartwarming, really, because it seems that the political discourse has sunk to such a degree where everybody sees the other side as a potential disaster, and it's no longer just mere political or social or economic disagreements, but kind of the end of the world. So seeing some rapport, some proper human behavior and ethics was not a bad thing to witness.
No, I think that's true. And look, the fact of the matter is, why was Michelle Obama good? And why was I impressed by her? She had some very important things to say, but she basically conveyed the message not through personal attack. And, she talked about what is required of the presidency and suggested that Trump is not up to the job, but didn't do it in the sort of vicious personal language that has become so common in our time and in our day. And I think that's what really gave power to her remarks and to her presentation.
Eric, usually these conferences are meant to energize the base, to get the percentage up, to give them the advantage in the polls. Do you see the DNC achieving this effect for Biden in this case? Or if I relate to some comments that appeared on social media, it was either some said it was boring, others said, enough with inspiration, it's time to see actual deeds. What's your instinct on this?
Well, I thought they did a fairly good job of combining the inspiration with the political policy. But also, let's keep in mind what their task is. Biden is a centrist. And a centrist can be a handicap because, you sort of lack the pizzazz, you lack the sizzle that comes with being a strong ideological figure. But at this particular moment, that's exactly what they want to convey. His campaign wants to be a campaign that will welcome anybody from across the political spectrum who doesn't particularly like Donald Trump or doesn't like Donald Trump a lot and wants to save America. So I think, that's what we're hearing when people are saying, well, where's the drama? The drama maybe isn't there, but if you want to have broad appeal and you want to emphasize the centrist credentials of your leader, then I think they're doing it exactly right.
Many of the target voters, the constituents that Biden and the Democrats want to appeal to would be, workers in factories and unions. And sometimes what you hear from these people is that not that they support the Democrats, the Republicans or Trump, but they feel that the Democrats are only there during election campaigns to shake hands, and then they forget about them, thus leading to the results sometimes we see on the political level. Do you agree with this assessment?
Well, first of all, I think it's a problem for political elites on both sides of the aisle. I think that's why Trump got elected. But, the question is, has he really responded to their needs during these past 4 years, or has he responded to their prejudices in order to cover for the fact that he's not responding to their needs? The crises that we face right now are so overwhelming, and in particular, his handling of the pandemic, his handling of the economy, his handling of healthcare-related issues, and so on. These are things that have a direct impact on the lives of working Americans. So even if they have some concerns about elites and will they be forgotten, I tend to think, first of all, that these policy concerns might overcome that. And second of all, Joe Biden himself does not project an image of being an elite leader who's out of touch. He's from Scranton, Pennsylvania. He came from working class origins. He's a regular kind of guy for those folks who've had contact with him. So I think he's the best possible person to overcome these concerns.
If we dive into the issues, so let's do that for a minute. We've seen tremendous developments in the Middle East with Israel potentially, signing the peace accord with UAE, but potentially with other Arab countries in the region, major development. So one of the major issues behind that was Iran. So let's talk Iran for a minute. The criticism of the Iran deal is, in many people's opinions, what brought Israel and the moderate Sunni states and the Gulf states together, potentially, hopefully for an all-out peace, but including President Trump's rejection of the Iran deal and Prime Minister Netanyahu's continuous focus and criticism of the Iranian regime and its negative regional role. Now, my question to you is, in the event of a Biden presidency, what do you think will be the impact when it comes both to Israel and Gulf states and when it comes to Iran? Because Biden was part of the Obama administration pushing for the very same deal.
Well, you've raised several questions. I mean, there's the broader issue of Trump's foreign policy, and we can come to that in a minute. That's exceedingly important now. I think you have to look at Iran and everything else he's done as part of the broader strategy that he either presents or doesn't present. In terms of Iran specifically, look, I disagree with what is much of the conventional wisdom in Israel when people look at Iran. What did Trump say about Iran? He said, we're going to pull out of the deal. The Iranians will come crawling back after our sanctions are applied, and then we're going to get a better deal. But when we look at where we are now, we're almost 4 years to his presidency. It's not the Iranians who are isolated. We are isolated. Not a single one of our allies supports us. And I'm not even talking about Russia and China, where there's never any chance, really, that they were going to support us. But our European allies, the Iranians are closer to a bomb today than they were when Trump became president. So how exactly is all that good for Israel? I simply don't see it. I think it's a misread of the realities on the ground. Biden's essentially his view on Iran is we need to repair our alliances with our allies. We need to go back into the deal, and then we need to renegotiate those parts of the deal that need to be renegotiated. So I don't know if that'll work or not. I think it might. I think there's no way it could be worse than the current reality that we're facing right now in Iran.
Let me push back a little bit, Eric, on this, because, sometimes perception is reality. So even the same criticism you're mentioning of Trump has often been heard even within Israel vis-a-vis Prime Minister Netanyahu, whom are saying, you keep on mentioning Iran, but when was it, you were thinking about attacking Iran, you never did. We've never seen you follow up on any of these threats. You're only using it as a specter. But the truth is that he has been his position has been very clear vis-a-vis what Iran is. And even though Trump's foreign policy point of, getting the European behind him against Iran, in principle, where he stands vis-a-vis the regime. Whereas when it came to the past administration, there are those who looked at the way President Obama treated Iran differently. For instance, the lack of support for the Green Revolution. For instance, the transfer of, billions of dollars in cash to the Iranian regime, which seemed, rather open to a regime that's far beyond Javad Zarif. So that perception dictated a reality and maybe propelled this, trust between the Gulf states and Israel and the United States, because we all know the criticism that the U.S. came under from the Arab world during that deal. And that could have played a significant role in both what's happening between Israel and the Gulf states and vis-a-vis Iran. What do you say to that?
Well, we'll come to the Gulf states in a minute. Look, this notion of, we know where he is in his heart, and where his sympathies are. Sympathies are not going to be helpful here. We don't need sympathies. It was never going to be possible for the sanctions to work in the absence of certainly European participation. Again, Russia and China participation were never even an option, even though Trump talked as if it was a possibility. The Iranians trade with Europe. They do a great deal of trade with Europe. You needed an alliance with Europe in order to make the sanctions work and in order to be effective in changing Iran's behavior. We're not talking here about sending signals. We're talking about realities. And look, that's Trump's problem in general. First of all, in terms of the UAE, that's a different matter. I mean, what's happened is the Gulf states are worried about Iran. I think rightly so, partly, partly because we haven't done enough in order to contain them. And so after 25 years of the UAE and Israel having relations that were secret, they've come into the public eye. And I think that Trump is to be applauded for that. You have to give him credit where credit is due. And I think we have to see that as an important accomplishment. But the fact is, how are we going to deal with the Iranians, and how are we going to deal with a hostile world in a way that really is going to meet Israel's need? Now, the problem with Trump is, look at his overall foreign policy here. He is an American firster, proudly so. He uses the words proudly. What does that mean? He's an isolationist. He's a unilateralist. A lot of bluster, very little action. He's withdrawn from a long list of treaties and alliances. He didn't respond to Russian intervention in Syria or to Russian provocations elsewhere. He abandoned the Kurds in Syria. On and on. He's friendlier to Putin and to Kim Jong-un than he is to our democratic allies. And when he did use force, which he did in Syria and Iran, it was very limited in a one-off kind of a way. Now, add in Trump's handling of COVID-19, and what do you have? You have America is a laughingstock in the world.
Eric,
who will do the best to restore America? One more sentence, and then who will do the best to restore American credibility, to restore American alliances, to restore American standing in the world? And if Israel is truly threatened, who will ultimately be the best defender of Israel? I want to suggest that that's Joe Biden and not Donald Trump, who speaks the language of America first.
So I just want to, 2 quick points. One is give credit where credit is due. I think in general that's missing in the discourse, because when you stick to a point of always criticizing an individual, whether it's Trump, Netanyahu, or anyone else, you lose credibility when there is, call a spade a spade. And that's kudos to you, Eric. But I wanted to ask you, you're talking about Trump's actions, and yet he did something that was one of the most unbelievable Middle Eastern feats. And I'm not talking about only peace. Taking out Qasem Soleimani with his incredible work of creating that network of terror in the Middle East. That was a very bold move, wasn't it?
I give him full credit for that. Again, I made reference to it. I mean, again, he moved the embassy to Jerusalem. I give him credit for that. I mean, that was very important in my eyes. And the role that he and Jared Kushner play also very important. He is not a man who believes. He is not a man who believes in the use of American force. He is not a man who believes in an active American role around the world. He is not a man that we can count on to defend Israel if Israel actually needs defense, which means military might. He took out a terrorist. Right. He took out a terrorist. We give him credit for that. But again, I said very specifically, it was a limited one-off action. Anything beyond that, this isn't subjective. What he has said again and again and again is we need to withdraw from the world. We need to pull back. And also by ending our alliances with countries around the world, he's made the Western alliance far weaker as a result. He's made our country far weaker. And the potential defense of our allies as a result is inevitably going to suffer.
I just want to dig a little deeper into the point, just so that it's clear for our viewers. You're saying that you see a real risk of Trump turning his back on Israel, a president who recognized the Golan Heights, who moved the embassy, like you said, to Jerusalem, who took out Qasem Soleimani, who stood by Israel, and who's not only facing the American Jewish community, but also the evangelical right. And you truly feel that there is a chance, if need be, or if the circumstances arise, that he will turn his back on Israel, if need be.
No, I never said turn his back on Israel. Those are your words, not my words.
Well, let's clarify. That's exactly why I'm asking.
First of all, 2 points. In my view, put aside the evangelicals. Put aside the evangelicals. It's much exaggerated. Israel's a concern for them. I welcome their support. Let me be very clear. They're not a major factor here. Look, when annexation went away, what did we hear from the evangelicals? And the answer is we heard nothing. We heard nothing. In the final analysis, the evangelicals are going to be of limited significance here. Their issues are other issues. It's not that Trump is going to wake up one day and say, I don't care about Israel. It's that if Israel needs support of a more concrete nature, if it needs American force, American troops, if the Iranians were to constitute a threat in a concrete way, which is not out of the question, under those circumstances, will an American firster president, an isolationist president, a unilateralist president, can he be counted on to provide the defense and the support that will be needed, including, if necessary, military action? My view is the answer to that is very clear, and the answer is no, because his foreign policy is chaotic, and we never know from one day to the next what he's going to say and what he's going to do. Is he a reliable ally if Israel is really in danger? My view is I simply don't see it.
I thank you very much for clarifying it. And I want to dive into the issue of Jews and Democrats for a minute. We know that traditionally 70% of American Jewry votes Democratic, right? That's how they go about presidential elections. In your opinion, does it make the Jewish vote irrelevant to the leaders of the Democrats because they know that they have the Jews in their back pocket? Do you think they're taking it for granted? And if they do, what should the American Jewish community do to make its voices heard within the Democratic Party?
Well, first of all, generally speaking, it's 70-30, but not always. And if you have a president who is seen as particularly unfriendly to Israel, those numbers can change. For example, Reagan got about 40% of the Jewish vote. George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, Bush 1, only got 11% of the Jewish vote because, Carter was seen as unfriendly to Israel and Bush 1 was seen as unfriendly to Israel. So it's not an absolute. Look, it is generally speaking true. We constitute 2 to 3% of the population. It's best not to exaggerate our own importance in terms of the impact we're going to have in elections. It is possible that in a few swing states, the Jewish vote could make a difference, Florida being the most likely example. Apart from that, again, our impact is likely to be minimal under any circumstances. Having said that, we impact elections in a variety of ways. First of all, we're activists on the ground. And second of all, Jews give money. So the amount of money we give and the extent to which we work for candidates that we care about, all of those things are important. So I don't think we will be taken for granted by either party. I think the combined significance of all those factors means that both Republicans and Democrats will be looking to cultivate the Jewish support.
Thank you. I've heard a lot of concern, Eric, from a lot of Democratic Jews who, even though they've always been part of the Democratic Party, are concerned with people like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. We've heard about the Benjamins. Even in her, just a couple of weeks ago in a re-election campaign, she referred to Jewish money against her. And then Rashida Tlaib, who came out when a boy went missing in Jerusalem and immediately pointed the finger in some sort of an 1890 blood libel that the Jews have done something with the child until he was found in a water hole in Jerusalem. What do you tell those voters, those Jews within the Democratic Party, when Speaker Nancy Pelosi just endorsed Ilhan Omar's re-election campaign? How do you address those concerns?
Look, there's a fringe in the Democratic Party that I think we should be worried about when it comes to Israel's welfare. The heart of the party, the mainstream of the party, is very pro-Israel. What I say to them mostly is this: Biden-Harris is a dream team for Israel. It's a dream team for Israel. We just had a Democratic primary. It was a contentious primary. It lasted a long time. You had a full debate of the issues, and who came out ahead? And not by a little bit, but by a lot. And the answer is, what came out ahead is a candidate who is a firm friend of Israel, has been a firm friend of Israel for half a century. He says he loves Israel, and he does. He understands Israel's concerns. He supports Israel. He believes in keeping disagreements in private whenever possible. He supports Israel to UN, has been terrific on aid. He did very good work on the platform.
But Eric, you remember that there was a reference made to, in one of the books after the Obama term, in one of the visits of Prime Minister Netanyahu. I'll never forget the statement when it was mentioned that Joe Biden told the Israelis on their way to the meeting in the Oval Office, "I'm your only friend in this administration." So that also has to be said. But do you really feel that Ilhan Omar and the squad, do you consider them fringe?
Yes. I mean, in terms of the foreign policy of the Democratic Party, you look at who people voted for and you look at the platform, and of turning them into the party when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are leading the ticket is just absurd. And look, I would also point out this. Sheldon Adelson. I agree with Sheldon Adelson on virtually nothing, with the exception of Birthright. He's a supporter of Birthright, and I'm a supporter of Birthright, so I give again credit where credit is due. He deserves a lot of credit for that. Apart from that, we don't have anything that we agree on. Why is it that there's been all this publicity about Sheldon Adelson cutting way back on his support for Trump? Why is that? He was the largest donor of the last election campaign. This time around, he's given little or nothing. There have been reports all over the place. Trump has rebuked them. if Sheldon Adelson thought that Joe Biden and the Joe Biden ticket were a threat to Israel, nothing is more certain than the fact that he would be contributing at unimaginable levels to the Trump campaign. But the fact is, even Sheldon Adelson doesn't believe that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are a threat to the state of Israel. He understands they're friends and that they will be supportive.
So forget about the negatives. Let's talk positives. We've seen Trump, like you said, recognizing Golan Heights and Jerusalem and all of that. What do you expect the Biden-Harris administration to do with regards to Israel? How can they exceed, or how will they exceed such achievements?
I think in the shorter term, foreign policy in general, including Israel, are not going to be in the top of anybody's priority list. The economy faces deep and profound problems. The pandemic will not yet be resolved. There's tremendous issues of inequality. That's going to be the top of the agenda. That's what Biden is going to focus on. He is not going to turn his attention in the short term to resolving resolving the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. I think he recognizes right now that in the short-term future, there's not much that can be done. I think he'll pull back and focus on the major problems that our country faces, and I think that will be the right thing for him to do. Meanwhile, I think he will continue this process of trying to build alliances with the Gulf states, bring in the Saudis if you possibly can. That will be much harder. And put together an anti-Iran alliance. That's in America's interest. You want to put pressure on Iran. Then working together with an alliance of Gulf states, with Israel a part of that alliance, is certainly something that he will support. And, he's indicated that. So I think that'll be his agenda, but it'll be a low-key agenda.
Are you not concerned with, for instance, Biden's statement of a few months ago that he will resume payments to the Palestinian Authority, even though this is what is defined by Israel and others as pay for slay, money going directly to terrorists who kill Jews, or the fact that Kamala Harris chose to refuse to appear at AIPAC's policy conference and even, did not condemn Omar's blatant anti-Semitism? These signs do not concern you?
Look, this with respect, this is a stretch. We're looking for ways for very strong pro-Israel people to be classified, as hostile to Israel. We could talk about President Trump and his ties to white supremacists, and we could talk about that for an hour, and it would be legitimate because he has those ties. Does that make him an anti-Semite? It doesn't. I think we need to be careful in not presenting Biden and Harris as anything other than what they are, which are strong, good, solid friends of the state of Israel.
I will tell you this, since we have to end, and even though I personally could have continued this for a long time, I can tell you that what you just said is in full agreement with some voices in the far left who are crying out that, a Biden-Harris ticket, like you say, is a continuation of the pro-Israel ticket in the Democratic Party, and they are heavily critical of this choice. So I think it's important to take note of that as well. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us, Eric. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today.
Good to be with you.
And thank you for sharing your insights on this very important matter relevant to so many of us. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, stay happy in these challenging times. I'd like to thank our director, Sloan Copeland, JBS's managing director, Dara Golob, our technical manager, Michael Paley, transmission manager, John McDevitt, and to our wonderful producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. For JBS, I'm Shahar Azani. Until next time, and see you soon. Shalom and lehitraot.